Yo, Dragon Ballers, welcome back to another video. Today's topic, in my opinion, is very interesting. I want to talk about Bandai's design philosophy, mostly surrounding the Unison Warrior block. So basically from set 10 to now, with some older stuff sprinkled in. And I want to talk about this because it's been something that I've been thinking about for a while, but I had a conversation with a friend of mine, shout out to you, James, and this really did just spark this idea for the video and kind of how I wanted to approach it. So we're going to look at how these different colors and these different archetypes have been designed within the last block and whether or not it's a good or a bad thing. Now, what this video is not going to be is me just ragging on Bandai. I actually like a lot of their design philosophies, but there are some that I don't like. As I think is the take of most people, there's some things you like, some things you don't like. What this will be, I think this will be good for new players to get an idea of how each color functions, at least in the modern Dragon Ball Super format. But I also think this will open up a healthy discussion as to, you know, maybe some ways they can design things in the future, or maybe some ways that things can be improved. Because I'll be honest with you guys, the last like set or two, probably like post emergency ban list set 14, have been absolutely incredible. The game's been very fun. Maybe just a little bit stale, but that's more so because set 16 got delayed more than any like design issues within the game. So I think they're on the right track as of right now, but of course there are always improvements that can be made, and we want to really prevent things from getting into a poor state like they kind of were, kind of like in set 11, a little bit of set 12, and like in the set 14 era where King Vegeta was killing people on turn 1, turn 2. So I don't want to talk about this in today's video. I think it'll be interesting. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe. Let's get into this. So the first thing I want to talk about are red, black, and green. The reason I have these colors grouped here is because, at least in my opinion, and again, this I think has been true for most of the Unison Warrior block, not the entire Unison Warrior block. There will definitely be examples that go against what I'm going to say here, and I'll point those out. So for red, black, and green, in my opinion, again, I think these have been mostly archetypal types of colors as far as the Unison Warrior block, that time period, and the decks that have done well. Again, for green, for example, I think a great exception to this is Cell Surge. That was a super dominant deck the last like 4.5 mana, but that's just like the amalgamation of the best green cards possible with a really strong green leader. But if you go more so by numbers and how many decks have done well across the Unison Warrior block, you've had Green Gotenks, you've had King Cold that have been consistently good for a while, that are definitely more archetype based. And around the time that Gotenks was one of the top decks, people were complaining a bit about how the game was a bit too archetypal. So that's just a little bit of anecdotal evidence for you guys there. But black, same thing. When Vedex came out, that sort of archetype was the best deck in the game, or one of the best decks in the game. Gogeta Xeno, same thing. It kind of just, you know, it's the best black archetype you can play. And then you have some other stuff like maybe Hachiyak, which I guess is an amalgamation of the best defensive black cards in the game, but still, you know, exception to the rule. And then for red, pretty similar. In set 16, red U7 Goku's looking to be very strong. That is an entire archetype. As far as rogue decks go from last format, you have Jiren, Red Broly, and the U7 decks, which are all, again, archetypal. And then in the past, you've had things like King Vegeta's like pure mono red version, not so much the red green variant. That was an amalgamation of just really good cards. And you also had King Piccolo, which was very archetypal. So I think for the Unison Warrior block, this has pretty much held true, again with exceptions. It's not a 100% steadfast rule. It's just generally how these colors have operated in the Unison Warrior block. Next up, we got to talk about the rest of the colors. We have yellow and blue, which have been very different than the other colors, because these two colors, or at least their most competitive decks in the colors, have revolved around just playing the best cards in that color with the strongest leader that can facilitate them. And again, one thing I should probably have mentioned earlier that I want to get across now is that I'm approaching this conversation from the most competitive perspective. So when I say that, you know, there are just these decks that are archetypal, or these decks that are just, you know, good card deck, this is from a meta perspective. This is from a high profile player perspective, a competitive level. That's what I'm talking about. There are plenty of other decks in all colors that are either archetype or not archetype based that you may enjoy playing. This is from a competitive perspective. And the most successful yellow and blue decks of the Unison Warrior block, again, for the most part, have been just these like good blue card decks, good yellow card decks. Again, of course, plenty of exceptions to the rule. Yellow Sin's an archetype deck that does very well in the meta. You've also had like Blue Baby in the past. SS4 Ramp, I don't actually think I'd call that much of an archetype. It does play a lot of just like good blue cards that happen to benefit from ramping. So I think this pretty much holds true. So that's how the colors have worked in the Houston Warrior block. And again, I mentioned before how a lot of people, maybe in like a set 11-12 era, were complaining about how things were a little bit too archetype based. Now we have 3 colors, again, from my perspective, maybe you agree or disagree, that are very archetype based, and 2 colors that are just good card dot deck, very generic card based. So let me know in the comments below if you think that's a good thing or a bad thing. Would you like to see more archetype based? Would you like to see pretty much everything being generic? I do want to get more into the nitty gritty of this, but first we do have a word from today's video's sponsor. Yo, Dragon Ballers, real quick, I need to let you guys know about 2 events that are coming up soon, being hosted by PPG. All the info will be down in the description, but we have the Dragon Ball Super Card Game Fest from March 26th to the 27th. This is going to be the first ever event where they are trying out the sideboarded best of 1 format. Besides that, it'll just be a celebration of the Dragon Ball Super Card Game, so you're not going to want to miss it. The other one is for organized play through the Pro Play Tour. We have the regional qualifier April 2nd in Kentucky, shots to the Midwest, so you're definitely not going to want to miss that. Shout out to PPG because they run awesome tournaments, but also besides that, this is the thing I've been concerned about in the past, where these tournaments just don't get enough advertisement. So shout out to PPG for doing more and putting in more work to advertise these events. I hope to see you guys there. Let's get back into the video. Alright guys, shout out to PPG for sponsoring today's video, but now we get into the crux of this conversation, and this is where things get a little bit spicy, because this is where some problems can arise. In set 16, Icarus is being errated to a state of competitive unplayability. That's not a complaint by me. I'm actually perfectly okay with that. I would have rather they ban the leader, because the errata is kind of just a disgrace to what the leader was. Again, it's competitively unplayable, so they should have just banned it. But anyways, a lot of people are saying, and absolutely rightfully so, that Trunks is just going to step up as that next best yellow leader. And yes, we did have power for Super Saiyan go to 1, so that's going to change the dynamic of yellow a little bit. But with Icarus becoming unplayable and power for Super Saiyan going to 1, a pretty minimal change as far as like the grand scheme of yellow goes. Trunks is just going to step in as that new best yellow leader, and the kind of dynamic of yellow is not going to change that much. It's still going to be yellow good card dot deck featuring Trunks leader, with just a few of the cards that the Trunks deck needs to run in order for its engine to operate smoothly. This is mostly going to be your Vegetas and Trunkses that the leader is going to revive from the drop area to get the most value out of its effect. Now, depending on who you ask, that's a problem or that's something that's fine, right? Like, these people that want to see more drastic shifts in the meta are probably going to have a bit more of a problem with this. But honestly, if you ask me, I'm really happy with the fact that there's somewhat of an even split between colors that are heavily revolving around archetypes and colors that are able to work around, you know, just the best cards in those colors. Of course, it can't be an even split because there's 5 colors in the game at the moment, so one, I guess, technically has to have more than the other, or maybe one color can be half and half. But yeah, Trunks should theoretically just step in as the next best yellow leader. Again, maybe some archetype based yellow decks will be good, maybe Sin will be good, maybe Goku Black will be good as well in set 16. But here's the question: assuming we can all agree that Icarus was a pretty decent step down in power from rebooted Mecha Frieza, which was obviously the best yellow deck in the game at the time, and now Icarus is being errated into a level of unplayability, when does Trunks get banned or errata? If we assume that Trunks just steps in as the next best yellow leader, when does Trunks get banned or errated? How does Bandai want to approach this, you know, good card dot deck color? Will they let Trunks just, like, you know, reign for a few months, and then when set 17 comes around and it just gets banned because now it's the best yellow leader for generic good stuff dot deck, right? And again, I'm very much so fine with the way that yellow is designed. It's my favorite color to play. I've said that many times. I like it. But if that's the case, there's a fair argument to be made that Icarus should have never been touched in the first place. And I guess the real question is, how much of a power gap is there between Icarus to Trunks to then the next best generic yellow leader? A lot of people have said that Trunks is better than Icarus, even unerrated, and I'm not necessarily a firm believer in that. I do think Icarus kind of held the edge a little bit, but I think the power level between Icarus and Trunks was not really that far. But I think that Trunks to the next best generic yellow leader is probably a pretty good stretch. So maybe going into set 17, if they ban Trunks, maybe there are a lot of different options for yellow leaders you can play that are all pretty viable, assuming they don't print a super strong yellow leader in set 17, right? But that's kind of the question, is if this color is meant to be that generic, just good stuff .deck color, how do you draw that line? How do you really determine, like, okay, this leader is too strong for the color, but we still want the color to be all the best generic cards in the color? How do you kind of parse that line? Probably by making yellow leaders that can still facilitate all the best yellow cards in the game, but the leader itself is just not that much stronger than the other leaders in the color pool, if that makes sense. Now, another thing I wanted to bring up, and this is more so for the archetype based decks, is why would you ever play a deck like Deborah Zeno when a deck like Gogeta Zeno exists? Again, this is from a competitive perspective. Now, I do want to say this: not every single card in a set has to be a competitive home run. We talked about that before on the channel. A lot of these cards do have to appeal to a casual audience, because at the end of the day, casual players playing and buying your product, that's what keeps your game alive. And I, more than anyone, want casual players to be happy, because I want this game to keep going and I want this game to survive. Plus, I enjoy going to locals. I enjoy playing fun decks that are a little bit outside the box. I still want to win. I still like try to win when I go to locals. That's definitely a goal of mine. And if you're printing these decks, let's just say with casual players in mind, if they're so far outclassed by the meta, and you're going to a locals that has a couple players that are either really good at the game or play meta decks, and you're kind of just setting them up for like this this unfun experience. You're setting them up to lose, essentially, because the power disparity between like this archetype and the Gogeta Zeno archetype is so vast. Now, don't get me wrong, I think Gogeta Zeno is a really well designed deck from a lot of perspectives, especially when you compare to the fact that Vegex and Dark Broly were definitely two broken decks in the Unison Warrior block. Gogeta Zeno is a much more tamed black deck, but it's really kind of the only good black deck you can play right now, besides maybe Hatchiyak in like some fringe scenarios. But again, just comparing what Gogeta Zeno can do to what the Deborah Zeno deck does, swapping with so many added costs, where swap in the past and other archetypes has been super free or undercosted. This is kind of a weird thing. So I think one of the things I talked about in the past too is that when you're making archetype locked cards, they can be a little bit stronger than the generic cards, because you can only play them in a certain strategy. But that means you have to tread a very fine line, because you can't make them so much stronger than the generic cards, because if you do, you run the risk of making that archetype severely broken. This is a conversation we had with Bardock the Progenitor all the way back in set 4. For the longest time, I was advocating for that card to be errated, to only be able to be played in a Goku's Lineage leader. The Goku's Lineage leaders at the time were, just nowhere near as good as Hurdagarn. They were okay. Like, I thought the one Goku leader where he's a kid on the front and his adult version on the backside, he was decent, because on his backside he filtered like Hurdagarn. That was okay. His other side wasn't too incredible. But yeah, you take a very strong card like Bardock Progenitor and you lock it to an archetype with other cards that aren't too amazing but are still playable, and that seems like a better recipe for balance than just creating either a generic card that's super overpowered that renders all the other archetypes useless, or an archetype card that's super broken and just immediately shoots its archetype to tier 1 or tier 0. That again, it is a very fine line. And this is not a criticism of Bandai. This is more just a commentary of how the game is at the moment, how it could be, and the way that I see things now that I've been studying this game for, I guess, however many years. But there's one more thing I want to talk about here, and this does kind of go back to that conversation of archetype lock cards to generic cards. Turles All Too Easy and Hits Value 7 are cards that I've compared in the past, because they're very similar when you look at them. They're both double strikers. They both get played in a very similar way. Pay 2 energy if you have 3 or more. The thing is, though, Turles can be played in any yellow Saiyan leader, and Hit can only be played in a Champa leader based deck, and you have to have no battle cards in play. Turles All Too Easy is just a better card on the face of it. Also offers you a bit more flexibility. You can either KO 2 things or draw 1 KO 1, whereas Hit, you always have to draw 1 and KO 1, which is also fine. Hit also has the added barrier, which is nice. But yeah, there's also the rarity difference, which again makes sense as to why Turles would be a stronger card printed, because you want to make it a chase card. It's a super rare of your set. That makes a lot of sense. But Hit is tied to such a specific archetype. There are only 2 Champa leaders in the game, one of which is red, and I really don't see any red-green builds of that coming out anytime soon. So realistically, Hit is locked to one deck and one deck only, where the other cards in the deck are very gimmicky and not all that easy to play and build around, to be honest. So Hit, honestly, probably could have been a little bit more juiced up than Turles, and Champa would still be no better than a rogue deck. And again, this is all like my assumptions and my predictions, but I mean, I'm a content creator. Everyone that plays this game has their assumptions on what's going to be good or bad going into set 16 based on what they've tested, what they've read, stuff like that. So it's just my 2 cents. But yeah, I do think that Hit could have been a little bit more juiced up. Maybe it didn't need the restriction to have no battle cards in play. Maybe, I don't know, it could have been tied to a U6 leader. But again, I think Champa's like the only green U6 leader, so that doesn't even matter that much. Yeah, they could have had less restrictions on Hit. It could have been maybe just a little bit stronger than Turles, but it wouldn't have even been a more meta dominant card because the deck gets locked to wouldn't be as good as yellow generic good stuff deck, right? So this is a little bit of discussion on card design, on the philosophy of design that I find very, very interesting. I think if Bandai's watching this, they could definitely take this and you know, maybe take some constructive criticism. I think that I've raised some decent points here, but of course there are millions of things that I'm missing. I'm not a game designer. I totally acknowledge that it is a very, very difficult job, and unfortunately a lot of times a thankless job because you can't please everyone. And again, I really hope that if you guys are watching this, either Bandai or you guys at home, this is not me trying to rag on them. I've definitely given my opinions when I thought they've made mistakes, and I've tried very, very hard to let people know when I think they've done a good thing for the game. They're definitely not perfect. No human is perfect. They are doing a great job as far as I'm concerned with the past like set and a half. And honestly, most of the Unison Warrior block has been great to play in. We haven't had these unbearable, unfun formats like Super Shenron, like OG Mecha Frieza. We haven't had formats like that in such a long time. So I do really want to give a wholehearted thank you to the design team over at Bandai. This is just a conversation that I found very, very interesting. I think I raised some interesting points. Of course, I want to know what you guys think in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I really do appreciate it. I'll see you guys in the next video.
Alright, now that you guys finished watching that video, Bandai ruined all my favorite leaders. Super Shenron, King Vegeta, Mecha Frieza, Cell Surge. They're fair. They weren't broken. No one complained.
God dang, no, not again, not again!
Bandai, please stop!